All right, let's go ahead and get started. I feel like Richard's keynote really teed up my presentation a lot, maybe more than he intended. He talked a lot about the strategic paralysis and the match campaigns. And that's really what my talk is about. So my name is DavidBianco. I also work for FireEye. About 2 years ago, I was working at another large company, and we had a big meeting with detection leaders from all over our company to talk about some detection strategy pieces. On the first day of this meeting, I had a real problem trying to get across this idea of take all of your threat intelligence and just put it all into detection. See how that works out for you. Why that might be a bad idea. So on the second day, I came back and I had created essentially a rage PowerPoint about my ideas of how we should prioritize some of this stuff to get better value out of the effort that it was going to take. And what I came up with was something I called the Pyramid of Pain. Who in this room is using threat intelligence right now to find bad guys? Raise your hand. Like 3, 4 people? Okay. I don't know what the rest of you guys are doing at my talk, but hopefully that means you're considering the idea of using threat intelligence. One thing that I see a lot is this idea that we have threat intelligence. We have a lot of facts. We are going to just take all those facts and kind of put them all into our tools, and I call it like the wacky wall walker approach. You throw it all up against the wall, you see what sticks. Sounds great. You have all this stuff you know about. You're going to look for all of it everywhere, in every context. Sounds wonderful. But as you can get into that, you'll find there's a lot of challenges. For one thing, there's some good things. It's a really easy thing to explain. I don't know, is it a strategy? That's a strategy, right, Richard? According to your... But it is quick to implement and explain, but that's about the only good things it has going for it, really. You find quickly that if you have any reasonable number of facts that you're looking for, you'll find you get lots and tons of alerts. Your analysts really are going to be buried in alerts from these things, most of which are just junk. You have all kinds of like domains that are not malicious, really, IPs that are malicious but not in the context that you've seen them, all kinds of stuff. You just have no confidence that when you get an alert, it is really something that you should be alerted about. But yet you have to check them out. Otherwise, you'll be on the front cover of the business thing saying, hey, they got 60,000 alerts about this, but they didn't bother to do anything about it. Well, yeah, you got 60,000 alerts in addition to the 3 billion that week. So you have no confidence in the results. And to me, I always think that if my adversaries are thinking about what my security strategy is, they're probably laughing at me like, they think that's going to work. So actually, we can do better. We call this, and this is not something that I really made up, but this is something that's kind of, I think, grown organically in the industry over the last few years. The idea of this intelligence-driven operations cycle. Now, when I think about this, I think about it in 3 phases. We have the intelligence phase, of course, where you actually go and you try to find information about your adversaries' capabilities, their intentions, their methods, their techniques, anything like that. And you feed it into a detection function in the organization that actually uses that information in some kind of intelligent way that we'll start to talk about pretty soon. And they find these things and they create alerts that are validated alerts, the real alerts that somebody needs to worry about, and they pass it on to the response organization. The response organization digs in, do a whole incident response, the investigation, take some actions to make the company's network safe again, and put the affected assets back into production operation. And probably they uncover even more information about what this thing happened, and they feed that back into the intelligence process again so that they can get better. And you can see from this, I'm not going to go into all this in detail, but each one of these stages is actually a different cycle. So this is like wheels within wheels here. But the basic idea is you will have an intelligence function. Could be a separate group, or it could be that you're just purchasing some good quality, hopefully, feeds, or using open source intel. Somebody, though, should be curating that, figuring out what's useful for your organization, bringing it in, integrating it, and then you have the detection. Sometimes these detection and response are actually the same team of people, sometimes they're not, but you still have all three functions. So before we go too much farther, let me tell you, I've been saying facts before. A lot of people confuse data with intelligence. But that's not really the case, not really the correct use of the term. Facts and data are not considered intelligence. If I just have a fact, I'm not deploying that into my detection and response. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that, not too much. But you start off with some raw data. Raw data, depending on what kind of intelligence you're trying to develop, may be something as simple as, for example, all your web server logs for 1 month. If you're trying to say, well, the intelligence I want to know is what kind of attacks does my organization see? Raw data is just like, get all the data, all the web server logs for your 1 month. And then somebody will go through there and create facts. The facts might be, here's the report of the top 25 user agents that have been hitting us, or here's a breakdown of the types of URI strings that we're seeing, or anything like that. But then you have those facts, and then an expert has to come and analyze those and put them into context with other facts, information about your environment, your management's pain points, your strategies, your other raw data and other facts that you've gathered either from that same effort or from other efforts. You put them all into context, and then only after that's happened do you actually come out with intelligence. That, in this case, that might be throwing away all the pieces of the facts that you say, well, these are just legitimate traffic, these are nothing that we care about. You might even be able to, if you have enough intelligence or you have some good contacts, you might be able to do some attribution. Say, hey, this attack looks like what Mandy and FireEye are describing as recently as APT12, for example. So that would be some intelligence. But intelligence by itself doesn't usually help you too much. You have to express that intelligence in some way that allows you to do something concrete with it. Yeah, sure, you can have an intelligence report, but most detection engines cannot consume intelligence reports, English text. You have to do something with that. So we create indicators. An indicator is a piece of information that just points to a certain conclusion. It doesn't say, if you see this on your network, you definitely have APT12. It's definitely a SQL injection. It's definitely something. It just points to a certain conclusion. Maybe you'll have multiple indicators that all kind of agree, either specifically agree that, hey, all these things point to APT12, for example, or maybe more generally agree like, hey, these are all indicators something bad is happening. I don't know exactly what. But individually, an indicator is one piece of information that points to a certain conclusion. It is not necessarily, though, a signature. Signatures, again, are the next level down. Indicators come from intel. Signatures come from indicators. At some point, you need to be able to put your indicators into a detection mechanism. That's when you end up having to create a signature of some sort. So now that we've kind of fully defined a little bit more about intel, the intel process, the indicators, I'd like to tell you a little bit about now the actual pyramid of pain. So you heard Richard talking earlier. Richard, when you came up here, you said you want to get your enemies into a strategic paralysis. You want to do, and you can do match campaigns and things like that. So this, if I borrow those terms, this pyramid of pain is one mechanism that you can help to induce strategic paralysis in your adversaries during a match campaign. The idea that I said all the way at the beginning of the presentation was that you have a lot of indicators. You can't just throw them out into detection. You really need to take a look at what your goals are and which ones support those goals better. So for my purpose, my goal in doing detection and response is almost always to do so well at detection, to do it so quickly at response, that I can turn my defensive operations into an offense against the enemy. We had some questions about, active offense. This is actually a kind of active defense that becomes offense. The idea here is that not all types of indicators that you have are going to be as useful in causing the adversary some pain. When you can detect and respond to an individual indicator quickly enough, you deny the adversary the use of that indicator against you. Sometimes, depending on the type of indicator, that may not be a big deal, they may not care. Sometimes, that may be a very big deal for them. It may be something that causes them to spend a lot of resources or effort to kind of get a replacement for that. And that's what the pyramid of pain is all about. The pyramid measures the potential usefulness of your indicators in context of, if I detect and respond quickly to this indicator, how much effort does it cause the adversary to go through to replace it? It also, kind of as a secondary effect, kind of measures the difficulty that you probably will have in obtaining that intel, and possibly also in applying that intel to detection. So it's a little bit of pain for both people. The good thing is that once you pay the resources necessary to operate at a certain level on the pyramid, you can pretty much do that forever then. But the adversary, every time, they have to pay that every time you find one of their indicators. So I want to go through this a little bit level by level here and tell you pretty much, a little bit of what these levels mean, and then we're also going to have a little bit of an example of some places where that might be a little bit something that you have to be aware of, a little bit of tricks or catches, and in some places a story or two about that level. So the first level here in the bottom is the hashes. The wide part of the pyramid, because there's so many hashes. I mean, every binary that you have, every document that they produce, they send you, every Trojan PDF has a unique hash. And they're kind of interesting because they are by far, of course, the most high confidence indicator. If you see a hash in your network that corresponds to something that you know about, you really don't have to worry about too much about vetting that. You can say definitely this matched, the Zeus downloader hash that I know about. This is definitely the Zeus downloader. I probably should do something about that. But the other interesting part about them is that because there are so many and they're so fragile, that they're not, to me, very useful for basis for detection. And I say they're fragile, that means any single bit, even one that does not have the slightest effect on the functionality of a binary or a document, will change the hash value entirely, and you will not be able to see that two hashes are related because they're only changed by one bit in the original source. You just can't tell. There's so many that creating lists of hashes of known malicious things is probably long-term a losing game. There may be some specific places where you're very interested in something, some hash values. For example, if you have good threat intelligence, it says this actor is using this binary at multiple of your peers, and they're seeing the same hash over and over again, sure, definitely look for that hash. Probably in 6 months, that will be a little bit less important. But for now, yeah, sure. In a certain situation, this is very good use of the hash. But in general, don't worry too much about getting hash values, just long lists of hash values. They're not useful for you. And you can see kind of on the bottom, I mean, these actually all hash to the same value. So collecting hash values, of course, one of the things you have to think of is what are your tools hashing? A lot of things hash MD5s. Some of them start hashing SHA-1, although I even just saw that Google is starting to sunset support for SHA-1 in the certificates in Chrome and starting in November because they feel that it's not strong enough anymore. Some things have SHA-256. So even if you are tracking hashes, it's important to know what your tools are able to find and what the things that are creating hashes for you, like your antivirus logs or something like that, what outputs, what kind of hashes they're using. Even though you may know the MD5 hash of a binary, if your tools can only do SHA-1 or SHA-256 or something like that, an MD5 hash is not too useful for you. So kind of the next level up is IP addresses. Again, they're pretty low in the pyramid. Does anybody have a long list of IP addresses that they put into their detection? Yeah? Yeah. How's it working out for you? Pretty awesome, right? Yeah. So here's the thing. Only newbies use their own IP addresses to attack you. These, by and large, are not the people that you have to care about. For sophisticated attackers, or even really moderately experienced attackers, they'll use private VPN services, Tor, botnet rentals, other compromised systems to hop through to come and attack you. It's really not that difficult for them to change the IP that they use to attack you or that the IP that they use to receive the data back from you. So again, tracking long lists of IPs might be useful in certain circumstances for a short amount of time, but in general, it doesn't cause them very much work. If you find their IP and you block out your firewall, for example, they don't really care. They probably have 1,000 more IPs they can just start using. If it's embedded in a config file, they might have to do a little bit of extra work maybe to update that config file, but in general, they don't really care. Now, the interesting thing is, for detection purposes for IPs, there are so many different ways to express IP addresses that all work equivalently. I don't know how many people know this, but you know, the dotted decimal kind of standard 192.168.1.1, right? Maybe your home firewall router or something like that. You can type that into the address bar of Explorer or Firefox or Chrome or something, and it will work fine. But so will all these other things. You can actually type in 0xC0.0xA8, etc., and it will go to the same place. You can type in the decimal 323223, and it'll just go to the same place. So for detection purposes, if you're looking at it on the network, yeah, you'll see the dotted IP. But when you're looking at it in log files or something like that, or config files, or strings in a binary that might be malicious, you know, detecting IP addresses, you also have to be able to try to detect all the different variations that they might use to hide that IP address from you. The domain name level, domain names are almost as easy to change as IP addresses are. The only real difference to me is that domain names require usually a little bit of pre-registration. You don't have to contact a registrar, set up a domain. And that's if they elect to register their own domain names and not just use dynamic DNS or hijack somebody else's web server and use their domain. But even the pre-registration piece is not that big of a deal. There's plenty of ways around that. A actual well-funded adversary can easily afford to buy a ton of domain names. Some nation states probably actually run their own legitimate registrars, so how hard is it really to just put in some database entries for their own domains whenever they want it? The dynamic DNS providers even really help that because you can register one domain and then have subdomains and even automate them by APIs. You can just create your own, register new ones for not very much money. But domain names for the detection side are starting to get a little bit more complicated, especially now that Google is really starting pushing, and Yahoo to a certain extent as well, starting to push the internationalization support in the browsers and in their web services. So you can see the Unicode domain here, Japanese domain, and then the Punycode version of that, they're actually the same domain. They're just two alternate representations. The Punycode is for people who can't really deal with Unicode yet. It's hard for us to type in the US the Japanese domain, so most times you will see these X whatever domains, the Punycode domains. But they're the same domain. So if you have one of these as one of your indicators, of course you need to be looking for both versions of that everywhere. Even more interesting is the homograph attacks. Homograph is something that looks the same but is not the same. So when you come to internationalization, there are a lot of characters that seem like they're the same when you read them visually, but are not actually the same. If I was a little bit more malicious here, I would ask you to tell me the difference between these two domains. But the thing is, you can't. It's a trick question. If you actually go into the PowerPoint here, though, you will see that the first one, ArchCON.org, is the legitimate domain. It's all ASCII. But in the second one, the A at the beginning of ArchCON is actually an international character that just happens to look like A, but it's not an A. So I could actually put in one of my config files, archcon.org, and it would look like a totally legitimate domain. But when you click on it, or when you read it in and your tool actually tries to connect to it, no, it's not a legitimate domain. So that's a little trick there. You have to make sure that you're looking for international support, Unicode versus Punycode, also the homographs. Interesting side note, Google has recently announced that they're going to start disallowing the use of homographs in some characteristics where they have a published list that the guys that do the Unicode standards put out of homograph combinations that should not be allowed because they're too too similar, they're too confusing. So Google has actually said they're going to stop allowing that in, I think, the links inside Gmail to help defend against this kind of attack. They call that the Unicode Consortium's highly restricted character combinations, I think is the name of the official name of that list. So as you get up a little bit farther into the pyramid, you start getting to the network and host-based artifacts. It's very difficult to perform any kind of operations in the target network without leaving some kind of traces behind. Everything down below this was really more based on the tools or the communications infrastructure that they're using. But here now we're talking about some actual things, people doing things in your network. And they are leaving behind some traces. It could be files or directories that they use to store their things. It could be, for some malware, they might have registry objects that they use for persistence, mutexes, even just strings in memory, even if they don't have any kind of file that they put on the system, but they are typing commands, those things end up as strings in memory. On the network side, you might think of distinctive transactions, like unusual transactions that you rarely ever see, of course, ripe for being misused. You might see protocol errors, you might see unusual values going in those transactions, you might just see different interpretations of the protocol standard as they are, for example, recreating part of their own FTP protocol or something like that. For the network and host-based artifacts, a lot of the things that you'll see, especially in HTTP, so many of these backdoors and tools are HTTP aware, you may see just, regular expressions that you can find distinctive URI patterns. You may find user agent strings really useful in some cases. For some reason, some adversaries put in their own super distinctive user agent strings. I don't know why. That just is a red flag saying, hey, detect me. And there may be just typos. So this last one here, it's probably hard to see in the slide, but there's actually a typo there. They just missed one space in between MSIE and 7.0. Otherwise, that would be a perfectly legitimate Microsoft user agent. But, errors happen. Maybe these attackers don't have quite as good QA control as the legitimate vendors, right? In many cases, their bad English is something that we can take advantage of. Now, at the next higher level, you start getting really interesting. The tools level. So if you trace some tools around at the artifact layer for a little while, you start getting really good at finding those tools. At the artifact layer, they're able to make maybe some minor changes to the URLs or the user agents or something like that, try to evade your detection. But once you have some experience with these, or you can get the intel from someone else who has experience with these, you start to be able to identify indicators of those tools that are less volatile, that no matter what minor changes they make, you're still able to find them. To continue past that, they need to create a new tool. Or get a new tool out from the internet and learn how to use it effectively. And that starts to require some real effort on their part, either real development or real retraining. We had this situation in an organization that I worked for before where we had this one threat actor who was really interested in getting into our enterprise, and they would use the same tool over and over again. It was their main command and control and data exfiltration all kind of wrapped up into one. And it was a really interesting tool in that they had a back end that did all the functionality, but the front end was kind of a bolt-on that did the network communications. So it was designed to counteract people that were operating at the artifact layer, saying, hey, no matter what, I can just easily change the communication parameters. I can switch from HTTP to HTTPS to FTP easily. We did this. We detected them at HTTP based on their URI patterns. So they changed the URI pattern in the next version of the tool. Great, we found that eventually. Then they said, well, let's try SSL, and we're going to encrypt our HTTP sessions so you won't be able to look at them. Well, we found that. Anybody wants to know how we found that? It's a really simple story, but I'll tell you later. Come talk to me. We found that. And then they said, well, great, we're going to change to FTP. We found that. And somewhere along there, and my memory fails about exactly where, we moved from the artifact layer to the tools layer because we noticed that the back end had this heartbeat, keep alive kind of thing. And no matter what they did to the front end, we could still detect the back end that they don't change. So we were able then, at one point, to wake up in the middle of the night when they used this tool. We got alerts, and we were like, yes, they're on the system right now. They're active. We woke them up in the middle of the night, and we disrupted what they were doing, like right in the middle of their data staging and the data transfer. And it's really funny because we were also so familiar with this tool, we could kind of decrypt the tool and read the traffic in real time, and we could see them falling back through their different footholds in the enterprise going, what the hell just happened? Who's looking at me? Are there any admins around right now? And then they cut off, and they never came back in the next few years. So what happened was we actually just made it a little bit too hard for them to operate by driving them up and putting them on top of the pyramid here. Speaking of the top of the pyramid, tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs. These are the expression of the attacker's training and experience if any of you have ever had to retrain for a new career, go back to school for a new major, it's hard. It takes a lot of time and effort. Some attackers are just not into that. It is basically the hardest thing that you can do to an attacker. And if you do it to them once, yeah, you won. Great. But if you do that to them continuously, or as a community, if we do that to them continuously, I don't really see how they can continue to operate effectively. It becomes so expensive that they really have to decide, are they actually interested in doing what they've been trying to do? They have to question their resolve, basically. That's great for us. Now, in here, instead of an example of how this can go wrong or a story, I'll take a pet peeve. TTPs. I hear so many definitions of TTPs. Tools, techniques, and procedures, whatever. No, it's tactics, techniques, and procedures. And each one of those three means something specific. Goes right under strategy. So here we have a tactic, data staging. Create an encrypted RAR file and transfer it to the exfiltration point. That's the tactic. It's the high-level expression of how they intend to carry out their strategy. The technique here will say, get a little bit more detailed. Well, we're going to do AES encryption because it's pretty strong. We're going to create files of exactly 650,000 bytes, I guess, because they're putting them on a CD-ROM. I don't know. And we're going to copy those files over SMB with like a NetUse or something, probably. And then you get down to the procedure where they actually have a cookbook or commands or something that they do where they say, well, we're going to use WinRAR with these following, and this is actually how you do it. So tactics, higher level, techniques, mid-level, procedures, fingers on the keyboard. There, now I get off my soapbox. So, in summary, most people using threat intelligence I've seen so far are using this wacky wall walker approach where they just take everything, throw it into all their tools, get buried under alerts and go, oh my God, why did I do that? There's a better way. And that better way starts by figuring out that there's a difference between data and intelligence. And also, there's a difference in the way you should use your intelligence to support your goal. If your goal, as I hope it will be after this talk, is to use your intelligence and your detection and response to cause pain to the adversary, I will tell you, the Pyramid of Pain I have found to be quite useful. Now, I'll put up my things here. While you guys take a look, by the way, I'm also shilling for Twitter followers. Anybody who's interested in this, I have the following, and I'll be happy to hand out to you. Small little quick reference cards for the Pyramid of Pain. And on the back, it has a totally non-malicious Liam URL and QR code to lead you to my blog post that explains the same kind of things that we've been talking about here today. So this might be a useful thing either for you to carry around or to hand out to your CISOs. If you want to tell them, hey, look what I found, we could really use this, DavidBianco is brilliant, anything like that. All right, and with that, I will take, I think I have time for a question or two. Do you have a question? Paul.
Can you kind of speak to your experience about when you first start your threat intel program and you get maybe a few thousand indicators and that's no problem, but when you start building that up to maybe 10,000, 100,000, how you match the growing number of indicators to your actual detection capabilities and what you can support, you know, on the wire?
Right. So in case you couldn't hear him back in the back, the question was, especially for new threat intel capabilities, how do you match the growing number of indicators that you could accumulate to support in your tools? And we have this problem a lot. That is one of the problems of the wacky wall walker approach. You really hear organizations brag about like the number of indicators that they have. I have over 1 million indicators of detection. That's great. I can tell you from personal experience that some of your tools can't handle that. So for example, I'm not picking on one because I'm really a big fan of Snort, but Snort has big problems with doing high numbers of IP addresses. It used to be that you had to do them as signatures, but after a few thousand, it starts to really drag your Snort performance down because it has to evaluate the rule tree for every packet. So they created this Snort IP reputation preprocessor, which is very efficient at that, but I think the last time I looked at it anyway, it could only tell you if your IP was in the list, but it couldn't really tell you the context around it when you had an alert. It wouldn't tell you, well, this was an APT4 IP, or that we saw this as exfiltration using this tool, right? So you either had to say, well, I can have a large number of rules, a large number of IPs, but no context to the alerts, or I can have a shorter number of alerts with full context. It's really difficult to just say, like, blast everything out into your tools. That's why you really have to go with something like the pyramid, where you can say, where do I really want to concentrate my effort? My tools, some of these tools are better at different layers. So I have a different thing that I talk about in my enterprise security monitoring speeches, where you do detection planning, where you match up what your tools are actually good at finding, at what layer of the pyramid, what part of the kill chain, etc. So you do have to have some kind of plan. You can't just say, let's put all my indicators, even a small amount of indicators, and just say, let's put them all into all of our detection tools, because you're likely to find that you either stress your detection tools too much and they become less effective overall, or that you're just getting tons of alerts on things that you don't care about because the indicator is correct, but you're finding it in a different context or anything like that. So you really do have to pay attention to what your tools are capable of doing, where they're placed on your network, and really what the goal of that tool really is. One more question? Okay, well, thanks everybody.